Hi, my name is Valerie Sly, and I'm the new principal horn of the Alabama Symphony. In addition to spending a lot of time practicing horn and getting ready for all of our amazing concerts, I like to spend a lot of my time making bread. So I thought it might be fun for us to make some baguettes. So I've got my well-loved baguette recipe that I've tweaked over a number of years of trial and error. And the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna prep our yeast. So I do everything by weight, but you can also do it in cups. And you can easily find conversions online. I'm gonna start with about 40 grams of lukewarm water. And then I'm just gonna sprinkle over about 1.5 teaspoons or 5 grams of yeast. And then we're just gonna set that aside for around 5 minutes. Right before I came to the ASO, I was in Colorado starting a doctorate at CU Boulder. And before that, I was living in Virginia. My husband, who is also a horn player, plays in Virginia Symphony. And so I was living there, of course, with him at the time. And I was there for about 3 years after I finished my master's degree. I did my master's at Yale. I was there from 2015 to 2017. And I did my undergraduate at Oberlin. So now that the yeast has had a chance to dissolve into the water, I'm just gonna mix all of the ingredients together. This is a really simple dough. It's just flour, water, and yeast and salt. So I'm gonna start by pouring my yeast and a little bit of water into this bowl. Try and get as much of that out as we can. And then I'm gonna add the rest of the water. This recipe has 340 grams of total water, so I'm gonna add roughly 300 more. Next, I'm gonna dissolve the salt into the water and give it a little bit of a stir. So we're gonna use about 15 grams of salt. You can do way more or less salt depending on your taste. I like my bread a little on the salty side. I'm just gonna stir that up. And now we just add flour. So this recipe has 455 grams of flour. We'll just mix this together. So when this starts to get a little bit too sticky for a spatula or a dough whisk or whatever you're using, then you just go in with a wet hand. The water on your hand helps keep the dough from sticking to your fingers, which, as you can see, is the messiest part of this. Once this is all combined together, we're just gonna leave it to sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. Try and get this in a bit of a ball here. Now we wait. I think the best part about playing horn in an orchestra is being in the middle of everything. We're right behind the woodwinds, we're sort of in front of the brass, and so you get this incredible surround sound. I love music, obviously I love listening to music, and I don't think there's really a better place to listen from. And it's so nice to be right there when your colleagues have such incredible ideas about this music and what they want to say with it, and to be able to listen from that spot on the stage where you're so close to everybody. I just think it's the best seat in the house. So this has been sitting for about 30 minutes, and all I'm gonna do now is just give it some stretches and folds to help develop the gluten. So I'm gonna go in with a wet hand again. This helps the dough not stick to my fingers. And I'm just gonna pick it up and I'm gonna give it a gentle stretch and then fold it over on itself. We don't want to knead this bread because we're looking for a really nice soft internal structure with a really crunchy outside. So the more you knead bread, the more chewy and dense it's going to be. So we'll do, I don't know, 6 or 7 of these. And then I'm just going to fold this over onto itself in a little ball. More water. Tuck it under so that we have a nice stretch on the surface. And then set it aside one more time to do another rise for another 30 to 40 minutes. Even though I love baking partially because it gets my head on something else, I think that baking and horn playing have a lot in common, or at least baking and music. They come from these extraordinarily long traditions, and I love thinking about how things like recipes and teaching styles get passed down through generations and shape the way that we play, shape the way that we make food. And you just feel a sense of being a part of history as you have your hands in dough or whatever. And I think that a lot of us feel the same way when we're on the stage playing music that's been around for hundreds of years. So at this point, my dough has been rising for about 40 minutes, and it's roughly doubled in size, so it's ready to get shaped into baguette loaves. So I'm gonna take a little bit of flour now on my hands, and I'm also gonna sprinkle it a little bit around the edges of the dough so that it can come off of the side of the container. I'm gonna lightly flour the counter and then just dump it out. So I think I'm gonna make this into 2 baguettes, but you could divide it into smaller pieces. I'm gonna get a little bit of flour on my spatula here. You could also just cut this with a knife. Anything to separate these two. You could also weigh these, but I'm just gonna go by sight. These look roughly equal. Maybe this one's a little bigger. Just add there. And the first thing I'm gonna do is reshape these into balls by pulling the sides and tucking them in towards the center, like this. Whenever we're shaping dough, we always want to create tension on the outside of the loaf so that when it springs up, you get that nice rise from the middle. So here, I've folded it over, seam side is down, and I'm just gonna roll it over on itself on the counter to form a nice tight ball. You can see we've got some really nice air bubbles starting to come up on the surface there. So I'll set that one aside and do the same with this other one. When you're handling the dough, you want to try and be careful not to pop the air bubbles because we want this internal structure of the gluten. When you slice open a loaf of bread, you get that beautiful webbing. We want those air pockets to stay in place. Tiny bit more flour so these don't stick to the counter. And then once again, we're gonna let them rest for 5 to 10 minutes. I'm gonna cover them back up with my tea towel so they don't get dry. And we'll give them a chance to relax. While the dough is resting, this is a good time to preheat the oven to 450 degrees. On the bottom rack of the oven, you're gonna put a baking sheet or something high-walled tray like this that's gonna heat up with the oven. When the bread goes into the oven, we're gonna fill this with water so that it releases steam while the bread is baking, which is gonna give it that really nice crunchy crust. Like I just mentioned, we'll be back in about 5 minutes to shape the dough. My favorite part about Birmingham so far is definitely the food. No surprise to anyone, but there's so many options, so many great restaurants. I've been to such a small percentage of them, probably. I'm really looking forward to exploring the food more. I think the sense of community that I've seen here, people want to talk to you, and I love that sort of sense of camaraderie, and I think that that's what we're looking for in what we do. It's been about 5 minutes. So we'll uncover these 2 rounds and we'll start shaping them into the long baguette shape. So I'll set this one aside for now. I'm gonna turn this over so it's seam side up, and I'm just gonna press it out into kind of a rectangle. If the dough at this point is really coming back in on itself quickly, you might need to let it relax a little bit longer. So that's kind of a rough rectangle shape. And then we're just gonna take the close edge and fold it in on itself into the middle. Then I'll turn it around and do exactly the same on the other side. So I've got kind of a hot dog bun shape here with the line in the middle. And now we'll basically just keep doing that so that we're creating kind of an internal spiral with the structure of the dough so that there's lots of tension on the surface when we go to bake it. So I'll make a nice delineation here, and then I'm gonna take this side and fold it in on itself one more time. Press this down in the center. And then the same thing one more time here. Kind of flatten this out. Try to keep this in a rough rectangle, and then one last time we'll fold the whole thing over on itself. And you want to pinch the seam here. Oops, my oven is preheated. So you can see we have a log, and now we'll just kind of start to roll it outwards to make it as long as we want. I'm gonna go for kind of a medium length, but you can make these long and skinny. Just make sure that they stay short enough that they fit in your oven. I've made that mistake before. Center here. And you want to press down with the sides of the hands into the ends, and that's going to give it that nice pinched baguette shape at the edges. If you start sticking, just add a little bit more flour. But you want to keep the surface very lightly floured, because if there's too much, then you'll have a hard time rolling it out because the dough won't stick to the counter at all. You need a little bit of tension. Okay. So now that that's sort of roughly shaped, I'm gonna put it onto my baguette tray. You don't need to have one of these. You can do this just on a regular pan, but I like the shape that this tray gives me. So I'll flour the surface of whatever tray you're using. Very generously flour it, and then lift this guy up. Perfect. Put it on there. And now we'll just do the same thing with the other one. So go seam side up. So now that these are shaped, we're gonna give them one last rest for 5 to 10 minutes. I'll cover them back up with my tea towel so they don't dry out, and then we'll be back to put them in the oven. I think the role of an orchestra in the community is sort of twofold. Music, and specifically classical music, has an incredible ability to present us with some of the most basic human emotions. And one of the best things about it, about the broad range of music that we play, is that you can take a piece by Bach or by Mozart or by John Williams and identify with it in some way emotionally. And you have this incredible sense of connection to humanity in the past or humanity in the present. And I think it starts to close some of the gaps. And I think being able to experience that live is so much better than sitting at home and listening to a recording. And I think one thing especially that the pandemic taught us all is that there's just no replacement for being able to experience those kinds of emotional reflections with other people. And so I think we first present a space for that, for people to come together and have these experiences together. Beyond that, it's our responsibility to introduce what we do to more people, especially to younger people, to give them an opportunity to have those outlets, and to find that sort of joy and connection to music, no matter, what kind of music that is. So the last thing that I'm gonna do is to make those characteristic baguette slashes. So I'm gonna lightly flour the tops of these, partially to help protect the dough, but also just because it makes the slashes look nicer. And then I'll take a very sharp knife, or if you have one, a razor blade. And you're gonna go diagonally 5 to 6 times down the baguette. Watch your other hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the same on the other one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the idea is that these slashes will expand in the oven and we'll get to see that nice inner layer of crust. All right, so now this is gonna go in the oven. When I found out that I had won the audition, it was honestly a little bit surreal. I mean, this is just something that, classical musicians spend years and years working towards this. We take sometimes dozens of auditions and we get really, really used to hearing no. And so to be at the end of an audition and not hear no it was kind of odd, actually. And I think it took me a little while to understand what actually happened. And I think I was sort of back in my hotel room afterwards and thought, oh, I'm gonna move here and I'm gonna do this job. It sunk in eventually, and that was a great feeling.